Okay, everybody, I think we're ready to get started. If you can please find your seats. Okay, I'd like to thank everyone for coming out to this exciting event. Bit of an agenda today. So we're going to be doing a land acknowledgement and a little introduction to who YIMBY is, and a little bit of an introduction to what the Housing Accelerator Fund is. Then we're going to have a couple of awesome presentations by Michel Durand-Wood and then Brian Pincott. Then we're going to have an interactive interlude with some snacks and networking. And we're going to have an awesome panel discussion moderated by Brian Pincott. We're going to have Michel Durand-Wood on there, Richard Mahé, the City of Winnipeg Housing Accelerator Fund manager, Marginet from Green Action Centre, and then we have Kathryn Davies from More Homes Calgary joining us in remotely, which is pretty exciting. Then we're going to have a panel of questions and answers. So if you have any questions throughout the entire event, feel free to ask them. And then those who are online as well, feel free to put those into the chat and we'll make sure that those questions get asked as well. YIMBY Winnipeg has the privilege of advocating for more housing options in Winnipeg, which is in Treaty No. 1 territory. Our work takes place on the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, Lakota, Deni's people, as well as the homeland of the Red River Métis Nation. As we gather in Treaty 1 territory, it's important to recognize and honor Treaty 3, in particular Shoal Lake 40 First Nation, and Iskatewégegun Independent First Nation. Lost my spot here, sorry. The source of Winnipeg's clean drinking water. It is also important to recognize and honor the First Nations of Treaties 1, 3, and 5, and where Winnipeg sources its hydroelectric power. Okay, so a little bit about us. I just want to take a little bit of time to let you know who we are. YIMBY is a volunteer organization that advocates for sustainable and financially responsible city building with a focus on infill development. We come from all different walks of life and live in many different types of housing. We believe that a healthy city has a variety of housing options for everybody. Okay, so a little bit about what we do. So we advocate for equitable housing options that create a healthy and connected community. We bring awareness to how our current development patterns are financially harmful. We also hang out. We do awesome hangout nights where we discuss, learn, and share ideas with each other. And we also host larger events like you see today. And we encourage more community engagement. My name is Tyler Crichton, and I'm going to be your host for this great event tonight. I want to thank everyone for coming and everyone that's tuning in online. Housing can be a divisive topic in our world, and that's becoming more divided. However, everyone in our community deserves a roof over their heads. I personally got involved with housing advocacy because I'm tired of seeing my friends and my family and our vulnerable community members being priced out of a place to live and not being provided the accommodations that suit their needs. With vacancy rates under 2% and the price of homes continuing to rise in Winnipeg, action needs to be taken quickly. Change is undeniably hard. Mistakes are going to happen, and we're going to disagree on many things along this journey. But I'm glad we can come together as a community and have important discussions on the future of our city. I believe Winnipeg has such unrealized potential waiting to be tapped into. Okay, so what do we advocate for? So before we got into the Housing Accelerator Fund, I wanted to take a moment to take a look at some infill that's already existing in our community and what that actually looks like and really what we're advocating for. It's not this. Here's an example of a city that's extremely dense. This is not what we're advocating Winnipeg to become, and we can avoid this with responsible infill. We advocate for communities that host a diverse housing options and doesn't restrict units to single families only. But that doesn't mean we need to build an urban jungle in every single neighborhood. On the right of the slide, you'll see a threeplex building that can house more people than a single-family home before it could. The street still has plenty of access to parking, and the house fits into the neighborhood. This adds more options to an existing community, making it more sustainable and strong. You can have a couple with no kids, someone looking to downsize, or a student living in a mature community that was traditionally slated for single-family homes. Here's an example of a nice fourplex. It retains its green space, and it doesn't tower over existing buildings. These two duplexes offer secondary suites where you could have your parents move in, or your kids have their own independent space. These types of infill projects are important because it allows people to stay within their communities, maintaining those connections that they've built over their lifetime, instead of having to move out to another neighborhood or outside of the city to find affordable housing. It maintains that community connection. Here's an example of what could go onto a mall site like Polo Park, for example. Quality housing could replace sprawling parking lots that sit empty most of the time. You wouldn't see these types of units beside a bungalow in the middle of a mature community. You would see similar buildings like this, however, along a major corridor by transit. These types of buildings. With our current infill guidelines, you'll see a lot of developments like this, where infill buildings stand out starkly from the rest of the neighborhood. And you'll see two tall, skinny structures beside a bungalow. This is because our current infill guidelines really restrict what type of lots you can build on, how big they can be, the lawn setback requirements, and it requires a public hearing, which adds significant cost to the project. Because of all of these restrictions, you'll see these projects isolated to certain pockets of the city, and they'll all kind of have a similar look to them. If we open up our zoning rules to allow more styles, make them as of right, and allow them in more places, we'll be able to lower the cost, spread them out over the city, and make them fit into the community better. Imagine this property if they were allowed to push these two units together, creating a 4-unit fourplex. You'd have more lawn space, the building would be lower, and it'd be more cost effective. Okay, so the reason why we're here today. What is the Housing Accelerator Fund? The Housing Accelerator Fund is a national housing program that was launched in 2023 through the CMHC, which cities could apply for funding to help build more housing. Our current exclusionary housing development pattern and population growth over the past several decades have put our city, and many others in North America, into a difficult position, and we've all seen the house of prices go up and the rentals continue to increase. The federal government offered significant grants to cities who committed to fixing the root causes of these issues from a municipal level. The council voted to approve the Housing Accelerator Fund application 13-3. So what is the Housing Accelerator Fund incentivizing cities to do? There's 3 major changes that the city committed to, and that was legalizing 4 units as of right citywide, legalizing up to 4 stories as of right within 800 meters of frequent transit corridors, and carry out the as of right development for mid-rise housing on mall sites and along corridors as proposed in the City Council Strategic Action Plan, Priorities Action Plan. These are some of the long-needed changes that we feel will help start dealing with the root cause of housing issues, and the Housing Accelerator Fund is the main topic of our discussion tonight. And with that up, I'll call our first presentation.
Is that better? Oh yeah, that's way better. Cool, cool, cool. Okay, cool. Well, so in May, June 2023, I wrote on my blog that it was just a matter of time before a major piece of infrastructure closed suddenly and just never reopened again. Well, 5 or 6 months later, the Arlington Bridge closed, never to reopen again. So, does that make me a clairvoyant? Do I own a time-traveling DeLorean? No, I'm not clairvoyant, and I don't even own a regular DeLorean. My superpower, if you can call it that, is that I can read and understand financial statements. And so by looking at the city's financial statements, it can tell us a lot about the future, right? And that is partly why we're here today. The crux of it all starts with finance. For example, on the city's balance sheet, we can find the city's net financial position. I talk about it all the time. I can never talk about this enough. It is at negative $1.2 billion, and it is getting worse every year. If you don't know what a negative net financial position is, it means that we have overspent $1.2 billion in the past on stuff that we will need to make up in the future. Where are we going to make that up? It'll be in future budgets, right? So every year when we come along budget season and we have more cuts and we have more tax increases and we have more deferred maintenance, a lot of that is just caused by that $1.2 billion that is filtering its way into future budgets that we just have to deal with. There's no getting around it. It's gonna happen, and it's happening right now. And every year we actually make it worse, so that every year we'll have more cuts, and every year we'll have more deferred maintenance, and every year we'll have more increased taxes, all the time, right? And that has at its core an imbalance, and that imbalance is between the private investment we have in the city and the public investment we have. So the value of private development versus the value of the infrastructure that we have built to sustain that development. Now, you might think that because that imbalance is off, that the answer is simple, is, oh, we just need more density, right? But I hesitate to use density as that answer. It's imprecise. Because density, when we talk about density, we're really sort of just looking at the income side of it, right? So we increase density, we're increasing the private investment. That's the income side. But what's just as important is the expense side, right? How much infrastructure are we using to go along with that development, right? And so, you know, a single family home on its own is not inherently bad. You can have a single family home that is financially sustainable for its municipality. But the intensity of infrastructure you're going to have is going to be gravel roads, ditches for drainage, you know, septic fields, well water, volunteer fire departments, right? And by the same token, a 20-story high-rise, while dense, is not inherently good, right? If you build it in such a way that you have a 20-story high-density apartment surrounded by parking with grocery stores 5 kilometers away, with, you know, all services, segregated uses, you're still consuming an enormous amount of infrastructure because everybody is driving everywhere. Therefore, everything is spread apart. So you have longer pipes, longer roads, wider roads. That's incredibly expensive. So even though you have more revenue because of the density, you also have more expense because of the infrastructure, right? And so what we want to do is kind of look at both of those things. We want to intensify the private investment, but also we want to keep our infrastructure investments under control. So yeah, so basically that's what we're looking at when we're looking at these changes to the housing bylaw, or the zoning bylaw. Now, because we know that we need to intensify, the details matter, right? We know that that because we are looking for a certain infrastructure pattern, that how we address these changes are going to matter. The details are going to matter. And it's, again, not just that single-family homes are somehow evil. They're not. We can still have single-family homes in a productive, thriving city. We still can, right? And in fact, we don't even have single-family only zoning in Winnipeg. We actually haven't for almost 8 years now. The zoning as it allows right now actually allows, by right, a secondary suite anywhere in the city. It's allowed. It has been for 8 years. And yet somehow when we look around, we're not overrun with secondary suites everywhere. Why is that? There's 3 factors. There could be more, but there's at least 3 that I've identified. One is there needs to be a community need for it. Just because you allow something, if there isn't a community need, or in other words, a market demand for it, that doesn't mean it's going to get built. If there isn't demand for it, it won't get built even if it's allowed, right? So changing a zoning bylaw to allow something doesn't mean we're going to get that thing. If there isn't a market demand in the place for that, it's still not going to happen. The second thing is, it takes time. It can take time from the time where you change the zoning bylaw to the time that the impact is felt, where that development is starting to happen. It can take time, right? Even if there is a market demand for it, it can take time to show up. Now, the third thing, and I think this is probably the most important, is that the details matter. So even if there's a community demand, even if time has elapsed, you might still not get what you're looking for because the details matter. Just because a secondary suite is permitted as of right doesn't mean you can still build one anywhere, right? Because there are a multitude of other zoning regulations that come into play, like lot coverage, like setbacks, like parking requirements, like height restrictions. All of these things can make it impossible to build something that is permitted, right? And that's what we have in a lot of neighborhoods nowadays. So even though a secondary suite might be allowed everywhere in the city, there are a lot of neighborhoods where maybe they're all 25 or 30-foot lots, therefore they don't meet the width requirements, or they're unable to give the necessary setbacks, or they don't have enough space to provide all of the parking that's required. So what's going to happen here is it'll be fine if we pass this, but it may not help because the details will matter. And it is the details that are the most important thing in here. Now, there are, I mean, I guess it's 2 things why this is important. One is, obviously, if we don't do it right, we won't achieve what we're trying to achieve, which is broadly affordable housing for all, financially sustainable city, livable communities, right? And so if we get the details wrong, we might not achieve that. The other thing, though, I mean, it's probably one of the most important things, too, is we see that when some of these rules restrict some of that development in certain neighborhoods, like we have now. So for instance, in Daniel Mac, in Spence, in St. John's, in Elmwood, a lot of places, a lot of the infill guidelines that we have make it so that that infill can't happen in our neighborhoods. Our lots are too small most of the time in the older parts of the city. It just also happens that a lot of these neighborhoods are the ones that need the most housing, right? They need the most housing renewal. But as soon as you have all of these little rules to restrict, well, you need a minimum lot size of this much in order to build a duplex or 2 suites or 3 suites, or you need this much lot size, that effectively disqualifies entire swaths of the city, right? Again, downside for the neighborhoods that need it, but also downside for other neighborhoods that are getting a lot of infill, a disproportionate amount even. Like neighborhoods like River Heights and Glenwood, they're getting an entire city's worth of demand funneled into their neighborhoods because they're the only neighborhoods who have wide enough lots and the space that is allowable. And the gut reaction when we, to push back against these types of changes is, let's put in more restrictions. Putting in more restrictions essentially guarantees that all the development is going to go to those neighborhoods, right? That's not what they want. That's not what anybody wants, right? We want just broad, affordable housing for everybody in every neighborhood, right? And so this is one of those counterintuitive things where fewer restrictions is actually better, right? We are trying to lower the bar for development in our neighborhoods, for small scale development. Small scale, I say that as 5 units and less. That's the same definition the city of Winnipeg uses. 5 units or less is small scale development. And so for small scale, we want to reduce that barrier so that actual competition can enter the market so that it keeps prices low. And when I talk about competition, I'm not talking about competition between developers. I'm talking about competition from residents. People who live in these neighborhoods who have changing needs from aging or kids moving out or a parent moving in who maybe need to adapt, that they can just call up a designer and a contractor and be like, okay, I need an extra unit here. That kind of competition is what keeps prices low, but it's also what keeps neighborhoods livable. Next year, 2025, the oldest of the baby boomers are going to be turning 80, right? So we've got an entire demographic of 80-plus-year-olds crashing down as a wave coming forward, right? That is going to be very impactful because, especially in a car-oriented city like we have in Winnipeg, knowing that most people, statistically, will outlive their ability to drive by 10 to 15 years, right? You don't want your ability to drive to be tied to your ability to meet your needs, your ability to get groceries, go to the doctor, meet up with friends, have a coffee. We need to adapt our neighborhoods to make it possible for older adults in our communities to continue to live in the communities that they love and have built connections in. That kind of flexibility needs to be built in. I do have some good news. So these changes are going to pass. They're going to. And again, I'm not clairvoyant. I just know how to read a financial statement. And the reality is these changes are required by the federal government. And if we don't pass them, they're going to ask for the money back. The city has already been spending it, and based on the financial statements, they have no way of giving it back. They are unable to give it back. We did see that in Calgary last year, where they didn't pass the required changes, and the federal government said, no soup for you. And so they said, oh wait, can we have a revote? Can we have a revote? And so they did. So the same thing is going to happen here. It's going to pass. The question is, the details matter. How is it going to pass? And that's where we need to focus attention, is on the details of how it's going to be, so that we make sure that we are actually meeting the needs of our communities and meeting the needs of our city, both financially and from a livability perspective. That's all I had to say today. Thank you.
That's awesome. Michel Durand-Wood, Elmwood guy, that was great. The details matter. That's wonderful. Okay, up next we have Brian Pincott.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Tyler, and thank you, Michel. Always great to hear your dive into this and sort of bringing that fiscal reality to bear. So people know a little bit about me. I've lived in Winnipeg just over 5 years. I moved here from Calgary, and I have immediately gotten involved with all kinds of things, and the thing that seems to be chewing up a lot of my time right now is being chair of the board of Westminster Housing Society, which provides affordable housing in West Broadway, which is a neighborhood that I live in, West Broadway and Spence neighborhood. So I bring a strong municipal perspective to the Housing Accelerator Fund. First thing about the Housing Accelerator Fund is there's absolutely nothing new about it. There's nothing new about the requirements of what the federal government is looking for within the Housing Accelerator Fund. This is something that cities across Canada have known for a very long time, that we have to change our pattern of growth. That the pattern that we have been in for the last 75 years, the post-World War II pattern of urban sprawl, what we call it is urban sprawl, has to change. And we have known for 20 years, 25 years, that it is fiscally unsustainable, that it is environmentally unsustainable, and that it is socially unsustainable. And so what the Housing Accelerator Fund is asking for, to be able to access that money, $4 billion, is basically the federal government going, okay, time for us with money to put the thumb on the scale to get cities to move in that direction. And that's what that's truly, they're saying money to start moving us towards a more fiscally, environmentally, and social sustainable model that we have to change. The feds have put in $4 billion right across the country, and there's over 100 municipalities, communities that have accessed it, everybody from Winnipeg and Calgary, Quebec, Broken Head, Duncan, BC, all right across the country, and it's everywhere from in Calgary. In Winnipeg, we're going to get an extra 3,100 housing units with this funding, 3,100 more than was already planned, to Broken Head, which is going to do 27 more units. So it is a program that is accessed by municipalities, and it is very different for every single municipality. The one common theme for almost everybody who is accessing the program is the 4 units as of right, is the recognition that the exclusionary R1 zoning is something that has to go away. We'll still have R1, as Michel said, we'll still have R1. They will still be built, but they can't continue to be built at the exclusion of everything else. So that is the kind of the one common thread through all of it. Now, every municipality is different, and every municipality is further on the path. So what we just passed here in Winnipeg, which is the Malls and Corridors Amendment, is something that, say, in the city of Calgary, they did over 10 years ago. They didn't have to wait for the federal fund to be on the scale. Calgary recognized over 10 years ago that this needs to change. We need to look at how do we add intensity within our existing footprint, and where's the logical place to start? Along urban corridors and in those seas of parking that are at all of our shopping malls. That is the place you start. It is the proverbial low-hanging fruit. So that is so every municipality is at a different place along the scale. Sadly, Winnipeg is behind. Winnipeg is pretty much behind. Most other cities, they have been for quite a while. And things like the malls and corridors, and then the change to the 4 units as of right, is bringing us closer to where we need to be. But again, every municipality is different, and the requirements in each municipality is different. And the Housing Accelerator Fund is basically about getting more housing. And it has come out of the housing affordability crisis that we see right across the country. And that has been something that has really bubbled up in the last 5-6 years, and this is a way of getting more housing built. We have not been building housing at the rate that we need to be built for a long time, which has led to a housing affordability crisis, and you look at what's happening in Toronto or Vancouver or Calgary or Halifax, and you see that housing affordability crisis there. We're kind of lucky in Winnipeg because it hasn't really hit us. The affordability aspect hasn't hit us like other cities. But the Housing Accelerator Fund is about housing. And where we have a real need in Winnipeg is for deeply affordable housing, social housing. And that crisis has been in this country for 20 to 25 years. We've had a affordable social housing crisis. And while we need more housing writ large, in Winnipeg, it's a little different than in Calgary, or Toronto, or Halifax, or Vancouver, or Edmonton, where our need for rent geared to income social housing has not changed. It is there. When it comes to, so let me put that in context. Somebody who makes $40,000 a year, family income of $40,000 a year, is considered low income. 40,000 or less is considered low income. And when you look at what people can afford when they make that, it's $1,000 a month for rent, if they're renting, $1,000 a month. And the average rent for a one-bedroom in Winnipeg is almost $1,200 a month. Two-bedroom is $1,400 a month. The Housing Accelerator Fund doesn't actually hit any of those buttons. The Housing Accelerator Fund requirements don't hit any of those buttons. So the incentives in the Housing Accelerator Fund for, quotes, affordable housing doesn't actually get to build rents that are affordable for that 40,000 families in Winnipeg that need that housing. 40,000 families in Winnipeg need that housing. The Manitoba Not-for-Profit Housing Association has done the research into this and has identified that we need 750 units a year of new rent geared to income housing for the next 10 years. That's 750 units a year of deeply affordable housing. And the Housing Accelerator Fund, when it defines affordable, it talks about 80% of market rate for rental. That doesn't get down below $1,000. That doesn't get to somebody who makes $40,000 a year, which is more than minimum wage, way higher than minimum wage. It doesn't get them to be able to have housing that they can afford. This was the biggest fault, the biggest gap in the Housing Accelerator Fund, and it was something certainly I went and spoke to City Council and said, you need to commit to the RGI component. You need to do that. That 80% of market rates is not going to reach the place that we have the greatest need in Winnipeg. And thankfully, in the first round of housing accelerator funds that went out from the City of Winnipeg, they actually did fund some RGI units. So they put out, in the first round, the city approved 1,100 new units of housing. 47% of those are market rate, so they're market housing. 25% of them, just over 25% of them are affordable, which is that 80% of market rent. And 20% of them are deeply affordable social housing. That's great. They have approved 300 new units of deeply affordable social housing with the first round of the Housing Accelerator Fund. We need 750 a year. And they've used this to approve 300, which is great. It's better than what they needed to do to meet the requirements, but it's a far shot from where we need to get to. So my point in all of this is to say we have an opportunity for the city to use this Housing Accelerator Fund to go, yeah, we'll build 50% of market housing with it. That's great. We'll increase that housing stock, but we'll actually use the rest of it to actually hit where we have the deepest need in Winnipeg, and that is in social housing, deeply affordable housing. And that is there is nothing preventing the city from doing that. So this is a great thing that we actually have this fund here. As Michel said, we can't give the money back. We have no ability to give that money back. So the message should be, let's do the absolute most that we can do with it, as opposed to rather than meet the minimum thresholds that the federal government is asking us, asking every city, let's actually meet the requirements and the needs that we have in Winnipeg. That's my talk.
Thank you, Brian Pincott. This is nothing new. I like that. All right, we're going to get into our interlude here, so you can have a little bit of time to grab some coffee, hit the washroom, and then we're also going to put up some questions on screen to have some conversation starters. So I'm going to challenge you to see somebody in this room that you haven't met before, go hang out with them, take a look at the questions, and see what kind of conversation you can have. And then those of you online, take a look at those questions and ponder them yourself. Okay, we'll be back in 15 minutes. Some good conversations out there, but I'm unfortunately going to have to put a pause to that right now because we're going to get on to our next portion of our event. So we are going to be now having a panel discussion hosted by Brian Pincott. So can I get the panelists and Brian up to the stage?
I finally get to meet you.
Yes, it's
Holy shit.
Do you care which order?
I don't care which order you sit in. All right, this is the fun part because nobody actually knows what's going to happen now, and I was just told to run this like Jeopardy. So, did you get told? Were you warned that it was going to be Jeopardy?
What is no?
No. What is no? Okay, damn it. Very, very quick introductions on the dais. Michel Durand-Wood, you've already heard from him. The Elmwood guy, a great voice for fiscal sustainability, how we run our city, and what fiscal sustainability looks like in our city. Richard Mahé is running the Housing Accelerator Fund program at the City of Winnipeg. So that $122 million, it's his little fingers are all over that. And I have to say that it is moving along faster and better than I actually anticipated. So thank you very much. Mel Marginet, who is with the Green Action Center. I almost called it the Ecology Action Center, which is in Halifax. Don't want that. The Green Action Center. Mel is a sustainable transportation expert amongst, she wears more hats than you can imagine. Than I think is humanly feasible, but she is here as a sustainable transportation expert. And so this is really important because when we're talking about, as Michel said, when we're talking about not density, but intensity. Oh, I'm Kathryn. Holy shit. You're not sitting right there's an empty chair right there, Kathryn. I am so sorry. Kathryn, hi, I'm really sorry. Kathryn Davies is in Calgary, is involved with more Neighbours Calgary, is that the name of it? Yeah, okay. And is a strong advocate in Calgary and has a lot of experience in exactly what we're going through here in Calgary and has been a voice to get the changes there that we need to see. So thrilled that you can join us from Calgary, Kathryn. Thank you very much. Thank you, you guys, for yelling at me.
I'm so happy to be here. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Great.
So we have a wealth of experience here of why we need to do, what we need to do, and maybe a little bit of experience elsewhere. And I'm actually going to start with you, Kathryn, my very first question. So Calgary this summer did the 4 units as of right and had the public hearing. The public hearing in Calgary, City Council heard from 743 members of the public, I think, came and spoke. And it just say yes, if it's close enough.
Yeah, we lost track, really. I have 736 written down, but
okay.
You know, what's a few?
So the public hearing lasted 12 days. Members of the public came for 12 days to speak to City Council about changing the land use, and they call it land use, not zoning in Calgary, changing land use for 4 units as of right. And in the end, Council approved it. After 12 days of listening to the public and 2 days of debate and amendments and tried amendments and failed amendments. So, Kathryn, you as an advocate for this, and having gone through what we may not go through 743 people speaking to council here, but we anticipate a lot of the very same arguments against doing this. What did you hear from members of the public, say, who were opposed, and how did you respond to those, to put it bluntly, NIMBY arguments?
Sure, yes. So our public hearing was the longest public hearing in the entire history of public hearings. And I'm not going to lie, it was a bit of a slog. By about day or three or four, I think most of us just wanted it to end, including the city councillors. You could just see the exhaustion on their faces. So I'll make a couple of comments. So the first thing to remember is that a public hearing is actually not an action of direct democracy. It's not that 80 people show up in support, 60 people show up in opposition, therefore a council is obligated to go with the majority. So we had about 740 people speak. It was 2-to-1 in opposition. And I think the fact that we got over 200 people to show up and speak in support of land use change was really remarkable. So I don't know exactly what the landscape is in Winnipeg. You may have a lot of people come in opposition, and that's okay. I think it's important to counter the idea that it is about numbers, and I think that the content of the messaging is a lot more important than just having a lot of people come and speak one way or another. So the arguments are arguments that are heard all over the country, all over North America. So people talk about community character, they talk about how they bought their house in a particular neighborhood and they want it to stay that way. And then we also hear some, let's call them uglier arguments. So we talk about not wanting the wrong kind of people in their neighborhood. I was at an engagement session recently where someone was like, well, we have $2 million homes in this neighborhood. You can't build rental here. And so I think that there are some major logic gaps in that kind of argument. But ultimately, there are really no good or valid arguments against this very gentle upzoning or intensification. And I think that there is a lot of value in just pointing out how incredibly beneficial it is to do something like this across the city without just how much Winnipeg stands to benefit from a policy like this. And I think, as earlier speakers have alluded to, everyone knows that this is the right thing to do. Across Canada, across North America, it's being recognized that this is the right thing to do. So I think if you can show up with a message like that, I think you will have success in a shorter amount of time than Calgary had.
Well, let's hope so. So, Richard, yeah, I'm sure you watched it wasn't a shit show. It was actually really good. I think part of the result of why there were 740, all of those submissions, all those people showing up at council, is that the city did a lot of work to try and get the message out ahead of time. So how are you preparing to talk about this and what it actually means for Winnipeg? And what does it actually mean for Winnipeg?
Wow, that's a really good question. I just actually want to start by saying thank you guys for hosting this event. I think I see a lot of friendly faces I've seen over the number of years and some new faces tonight. And one of the things I love about these kind of events, and I don't get to come to them very often, when I go to community events, it's often met with frustration, anger, about change. Potential change in their neighborhood, the fear around change. And a positive discussion around housing is critical in our communities right now. And so I just want to thank the organizers and everybody for this event and for inviting me. And so, as the acting manager of the Housing Accelerator Fund team, we're very excited around how we can bring positive change in our community, bring more housing, and this comes, as you mentioned, with zoning changes. The federal government through CMHC has certain requirements, and we talked a little bit about that tonight. We're working with our colleagues in planning and Hazel Boris, which many of you here know, and they've been working very hard since May on making some rapid initial changes early this summer, bringing in the malls and corridor changes, which got passed just recently. I was there with them until the wee hours on one night, and it spilled over into multiple days. The next change, as Calgary experienced, will be difficult because we are talking about change and people's perceptions around that and the fears around that. And so there's been a lot of internal dialogue around how do we convey that, what kind of proposed, I think it was Michel that was talking earlier about details matter, and they do matter. Whether or not you're in a community and you're seeing redevelopment occur, the rules around setbacks, height matter to the people who live there. It matters to the people who want to live in those houses as well. And so there's a lot of care and attention being put around creating those rules that we can bring forward to the public for discussion in the new year. It's going to be a difficult discussion, to be honest, because we're talking about change. And so we're very excited, though, however, to engage the public early in the new year around what that change could look like here in Winnipeg. And so we've been, I really look forward to seeing everyone come out to our events in order to have that dialogue, and we'll probably have something similar to what happened in Calgary in terms of potentially a record number of days of public hearing on that topic as well.
I want to point out that in Calgary, members of the public only get 5 minutes to speak, whereas they get 10 here. So, good luck. Yeah, can you imagine, Kathryn, if everybody had 10 minutes to speak instead of 5? It's crazy.
We'd still be going.
Yeah, exactly. You'd still be going. In talking about adding intensity, the goal of this is to try and get more housing within our existing footprint. But it's more than housing. As we look at what a sustainable future looks like, all of the other details matter. Mel, active transportation, what does success of the Housing Accelerator Fund look like when it comes to transportation and how all of those things tie together?
Thank you so much. That's a really great question. I think so much around building intensity in neighborhoods, those sorts of things, when you hear opposition to any kind of development, whether it's a restaurant coming into a neighborhood or anything like that, it's often around parking, traffic, noise, and then, if it's booze is involved, that there's going to be raging parties on my street, even though it's like a coffee shop that serves like beer. But two of those three things involve dependency on cars and the fact that we just can't imagine things happening in our communities without every single person having to drive there by themselves in a car. And where are we going to put the cars? Where are we going to store the cars? Every time I'm having a conversation, as I try to engage in these things with people who maybe haven't thought about this, it's always around traffic and parking right away. So to answer the question of details do matter. So how are we going to do this in a way that lessens the dependency on personal vehicles? So we're seeing a lot more intensity going into our, the kind of sprawling on the edges communities, but it's still all super car dependent. Condos, those sorts of things, they're still so far away from where you can easily catch a bus, or they're built in a way that taking your bike, taking the bus is not seen by the people going in there as like the easiest thing, the most convenient thing for folks to do. So we really have to be thinking first around how are people going to move in this community in a way that's not reliant on a vehicle. And that doesn't mean banning vehicles, it just means that they shouldn't be the most convenient way for people to get around. So, so to answer your question shortly is, yeah, we have to think about how people are moving and how do we make walking, biking, and transit the easiest and the most convenient in all of our neighborhoods across the city.
Can I jump in on that?
You can, please do. Yeah, no, I don't.
Sorry, I'm breaking the rules by jumping in, but on the Housing Accelerator Fund side of things, and just dovetailing with what you're talking about, is the first couple areas that we've been focusing on have been the downtown and on our corridors and mall sites. And those are some of our greatest opportunities in order to have a variety of alternative modes of transportation. Downtown obviously is hopefully going to be our most preeminent complete community where you can workshop, play, and live. And the next places to change, as you were mentioning earlier, Brian, is our mall sites. We have lots of surface parking lots. We have great transit that accesses them. Introducing housing there is a no-brainer, and those were the initial places we looked at in order to change rules around zoning, but also incentivizing housing as well.
I wanted to say something too.
No, you can't. I was about to say, in the spirit of Michel's presentation about lowering barriers and removing rules, what did you want to say?
I just really. I mean, I could say.
No, well, I'm going to ask you a question. You're going to get a question following up on that. I'm going to direct you. So something that just to follow up on that people don't know, the urban footprint, 50% of our urban footprint of our real estate is dedicated to cars. When you add up roads, driveways, garages, parking lots, car dealerships, gas stations, it adds up to 50% of our footprint is dedicated to cars. Michel, I think you've alluded to the fact that might be fiscally unsustainable for the city, probably for people as well, individuals as well. From a financial perspective, how do you think we unwind that? What does unwinding it look like to get to that place where we actually have a city that we can afford?
So there's a lot there, but yeah. So yeah, that's a huge percentage, and yeah, it's important to remember that that makes up for a lot of infrastructure, right? Not just the pavement for roads, but also all the sewage, land drainage, all of those pipes, those underground pipes. They go everywhere the roads go, right? If you have a road, you have a pipe, right? And so because you got to connect all the places with roads, and then all those places also have toilets, right? So every road has a pipe, and when you add up all of the infrastructure that we own, 88% of it is just the roads and pipes. 88%. The other 12 is everything else: fire trucks, buses, civic buildings, pools, arenas, laptop computers, like everything the city owns that isn't a road or a pipe. That's 12%. 88% is roads and pipes. Now, as we have seen, there's more than one way to build a city. You don't need the same amount of infrastructure intensity depending on how you build, right? And currently the Canadian average is about $107,000 worth of infrastructure per household. There's just a crazy amount. If you own a $250,000 house in Winnipeg, you personally are responsible for maintaining $100,000 worth of infrastructure. That's just such a disproportionate amount. Now, luckily, we can build in a different way that requires less infrastructure, right? We've studied in Vancouver last year. They did a metro study, and they found that high-intensity mixed-use development requires 5 to 9 times less infrastructure than single-use, car-dependent, single-family type of development, suburban-style development. What we know is that. So 5 to 9 times less is a lot less, right? We currently have about $12 billion worth of infrastructure work that we need to do in the next 10 years. We have identified $4 billion worth of money to do it. I mean, that leaves an $8 billion gap that we don't have, right? But that $12 billion worth of work, if we had 3 times less, we'd only have $4 billion worth of work. And we have $4 billion. So 3 times less infrastructure means no infrastructure deficit. 4 times less infrastructure means we now have an extra $100 million a year of money that we can do whatever we want with. Increase services, reduce taxes, build something new. That is a huge, huge change. 5 to 9 times less infrastructure. Now we're really talking a well-to-do city, right? To get there is not going to happen overnight, because to get here took us decades and decades and decades, right? We started building this way sort of after World War II. That's like nearly 80 years ago, right? That is a long time of doing the wrong thing one step at a time. It's going to take a long time to unwind that. And it's not going to happen all at once. We can't flick a switch and fix it all, right? We would love to skip steps, but we can't. It's going to be little by little. Kind of like Mel alluded to, like transportation is part of the planning discussion. Like, I think Jarrett Walker, a transit specialist, says it this way, that transportation planning and land use planning are the same thing, just expressed in a different language, right? So how we move is as much part of the conversation as what we build, right? And as Richard said, building these residential developments on mall properties, that is helping add needed housing, but it's also removing the need for certain trips, because now you have people living where the services are. So what used to be a car trip isn't a car trip anymore. So it's going to happen one little step at a time as we give people more options, right? It's about more options. It's not about taking anything away, right? We're providing more types of housing options. We're providing more types of transportation options. And as we give people those options, a lot of people are going to choose those options. Not everybody, and we don't need everybody to. We will still have single-family homes in the city of the future. We will still have cars in the city of the future. It's just the proportion that we have to get to a point where we have a tax base to infrastructure ratio that we can financially handle, that gives us a city we all want to live in and we all can afford to live in. And so so it's going to happen a little bit at a time as we provide more of these options for people.
Thank you. So, Mel, in the public conversation, how do you think we start to marry the not just where we live, but how we actually get around and connect into our city? Rather than, I mean, honestly, we have the quotes war on cars. It's, which is kind of crazy as a cyclist who you feel you're always being attacked, to think that you're the threat. But how, I mean, if we're talking about this kind of intensity, how do you think we start changing that conversation about how people engage with their city?
I think people have to experience it, and I think that we're making too many assumptions. We assume that everybody who lives in these new suburban developments is getting around by a car, and we assume that that's what they want and that's why they live there. But I'm always a little bit cagey about telling people that I newly meet about kind of the work I do, because as soon as you mention I work in sustainable transportation, you inevitably get cornered by somebody who's taken a bus and they want to tell you their nightmare transit situation for the entire length of the barbecue. But that just literally happened to me, and they live in new suburban development, but they take transit, him and his partner, and they have 2 new kids. And because they bought what we consider the Canadian dream or the American dream that we've sort of co-opted here, and they thought that they could do it in this development, and they were told that they were going to be able to do it, and they're discovering that it's really, really difficult because of the way that it's built and that they can't walk anywhere. And so as soon as one of them, they really want to be a single family or just want to have like a family car, and they're just really trying to make that work, and they're discovering with 2 kids that it's really challenging. But they know what it's like. So you can assume that folks like that don't understand our need to invest in transit, but they 100% know our need to invest in transit. And sometimes we give just a little bit too much room and space and air to the folks that are just never, ever, ever going to agree and think that the way that we do. But like you were saying in Calgary, that it was 2 for 1 against, but that the ideas to go along with it were presented in such a way and that the reality of the situation that we're in is just an argument that you can't argue against, that we're giving too much time and space to the people that are just never going to do it anyway. So I think just giving people choices. As soon as you give people the choice in their neighborhood, maybe it's 1 week during the summer where every single neighborhood has an open street, or just a little change in every single neighborhood where, you know, a walk the kids to school day or things like that. As soon as you give people choices and as soon as they have the chance to experience them for themselves, it's really easy to get them on board. I've never gone for a bike ride with anybody in the city for the first time who then went, this is terrible and I'm never going to do it again. Like 100% of the time, the people that go for those rides love it and they want to do it more.
Thank you. Giving people experience and give them the choice. Great, thank you. So Kathryn, Calgary has been moving in this path for a while. It started 10 years ago with the RCG land use. RCG is a land use in established neighborhoods that allows for 4 units on a property. Mostly, it ended up being mostly townhouses. It started with corner properties, but then it expanded out. It's just gone to this 4 units as of right. Tell us about the hellscape that Calgary has become. How has this completely destroyed all of our neighborhoods and communities, and every house has been bulldozed to do all of this? Tell us about the hellscape that is Calgary now that this is happening.
Well, hellscape just doesn't even begin to cover it. The destruction, the havoc, the pain, the tears. No, I actually just want to add one thing to the previous comment. So I agree that the overlap, the Venn diagram of housing advocates and transit or active transportation advocates is a perfect circle. And, you know, you talk about the family with 2 kids who are really trying to make it work with a single family car. I know that that can be extremely challenging in certain, certain suburban areas. So I live car light. I've got 2 kids. My family, we have no trouble getting around with 1 car. Our car rarely moves. And I think one piece of this puzzle is allowing a lot more people to live in neighborhoods like mine. I live in a central neighborhood. It's very transit rich. It's amenity rich. We've got schools within walking distance, grocery stores, places of employment. And, there are some great suburban outer ring communities, but I want more people to be able to live in my neighborhood where it's actually very easy to get around with a car. We've got transportation options. So speaking of my neighborhood, as far as the hellscape that is Calgary, I live in a neighborhood that piloted this land use about 10 or 11 years ago. So I live in a central neighborhood called Banff Trail. We did a planning exercise about 10 years ago, and they said, oh, well, let's toss some of this new land use district in here. It's called RCG. And so my neighborhood was one of the first to start seeing some of these row houses being built. So you can Google them. I wish I had sent in some pictures, but Calgary has a lot of really good examples of what good what these units can look like. So they look like just charming row houses, and they're grade oriented or ground oriented. So they're not apartment buildings, because that's very scary for some people. And some of them have basement suites. So they can actually accommodate up to 8 units in some situations. And I said this at council when I had made my own remarks at the public hearing, but I live in the neighborhood that is experiencing this, and it's I mean, it's fine. Like, it's had really no adverse effect on me, on my family, on my neighborhood, other than we have more neighbors. We have more people joining our community association. We have more kids who are able to live close to the excellent schools in our neighborhood. One nice thing about this scale is that it is contextual, so it's about the same height as the existing houses. The slightly larger lot footprint, but not a lot larger. So the construction that has happened really, it does fit in with community character, if that's something that is important to you. And, you know, maybe there's slight shadowing on my tomato plants on occasion, but that is a drawback that is far outweighed by all the benefits that come from this land use. So in short, it's not a hellscape at all. It's only made our communities and our city better.
Two things on that. One, you can actually get tomatoes to ripen in Calgary. I was never successful doing that. You must have a nice microclimate. The second thing too is...
I'm married to an Italian.
Oh, damn, okay. So you married up, good. And yeah, the RCGs, some of the first ones were actually in my ward as well, in Altadore, North Glenmore Park. There were some great RCGs that went in right at the beginning to show that this actually is such a great land use. So thank you. Richard, we have 200 neighborhoods or communities in Winnipeg, and 150 of those communities are below their peak population. 150 of them. The community that's declined the most in population in Winnipeg is Windsor Park. And surprised people that the community that has the second largest population decline is Wolseley. Wolseley is over 3,000 people fewer than it had at its peak. So as we think about changing land use to allow for more in established neighborhoods, to established communities, to allow for more density, more intensity, more housing, are you thinking about how do we look at where we have all of this existing infrastructure? We used to have, like in Wolseley, we used to have 3,000 more people that flush the toilet than we have right now. Is that something that you're thinking about as either next steps or how to be focused on moving this forward? No.
Yeah, I mean, we've been looking at that issue for a while at the city. The fact that in our mature communities, we've seen a significant drop since the 70s. The 70s is about in around the peak time for those kind of shoulder neighborhoods, and we've seen a decline since. And I mean, that's part of the life cycle of a neighborhood. And if the more you get into our planner geek world, you start to look at the evolution of cities and communities and neighborhoods, and you see they do go through ups and downs in terms of population as people buy in, they have families, they you know, kids grow up and then they leave. And then you have an empty nester neighborhood, and then eventually it starts to turn over, and you start to see a little bit of population increase. Even if there's nothing changing in the neighborhood in terms of development. Where I live, in St. Boniface, we are starting to see a little bit of that too. And so there's regeneration without really changing any of the land use or density. We're starting to see a little bit of the change, new families move in. But as we are a growing city, and we've talked about the need for a diversity of housing options for folks, we're looking at I think it was yourself that was talking about how much of our land is dedicated to single-family zoning. Most of our neighborhoods, you talked about Windsor Park, a lot of it is single-family zoning, or the vast majority of it is. And as we look at bringing in our zoning changes with the federal government, that's going to have a positive impact, slowly but surely, on our population numbers. One of the additional thing that we're also looking at as part of this Housing Accelerator Fund is a new zoning bylaw. And so when we recreate our new, when we redo our zoning bylaw, that's going to have an opportunity for us to engage with Winnipeggers around what's the city that we want to become, what's the tool that we should have that will help us create that city that we want to become. We've had a zoning bylaw in place since 2006 that has governed, well, we've got one for the downtown, but governing most of the city, it's been there since 2006. We've been trying to change it ever since we've brought in our new complete communities in 2011. We just haven't had the resources to put towards it, but we're excited to get on that very soon. And that's going to be a game changer for us moving forward.
Thank you. All right, it's time for me to stop asking questions and for you guys to ask any questions of people who are advocating for it, people who have to do it, people are saying, yeah, how does it all tie together? And then somebody they've gone through it successfully. Do you have any questions, Adam? I'm going to pass the mic as well, because, so people online can hear. And, well, actually, Kathryn can hear as well.
Hi, I appreciate everyone's viewpoints, very well thought out. I like the idea of infill housing. One thing that is not mentioned is that Winnipeg has the highest Indigenous population per urban area in Canada, and I'm not hearing a lot of talk about that. And that's one thing we need to talk about, is ensuring that moving forward that we have affordable housing for Indigenous people here in Winnipeg, and as well as tying that in with our transportation system as well, because we inherently have a transportation system that is systematically racist, so we got to take that all into factor moving forward, as well as, I guess, future workplace habits, as well as we're moving into telework. That also has to be factored in as well.
Thank you very much. That's actually a really good point. So we have a history of land use of zoning that is essentially based on segregation. We segregate out uses, we segregate out income brackets, we segregate different people into different places. Richard, how actually does moving forward on this address segregation? How do we avoid making it worse, right? Making segregation worse?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I love the topic that you raised, because it's something that matters to us a great deal. I think that it begins with these initial zoning changes, whether it's malls and corridors, or in particular the 4s and 4s, the 4 units. That will begin the process, slowly but surely, of introducing different types of housing and different types of people within the neighborhoods, making them more complete. It starts with our zoning rules. I mentioned about the fact that we want to do a new zoning bylaw. A new zoning bylaw is the tool that helps guide the growth of a city we want to become. And so updating that tool will help us move in areas that you're talking about. One of the things when we created our capital incentive grant as part of the Housing Accelerator Fund, in our first round we spent $27 million this year on the Housing Accelerator Fund initiatives. 25 million of that 27 went straight to capital grants to build housing, get it on the street as fast as possible, to speed housing. Many of those projects were either Indigenous-led, Black-led, gender-based violence housing. So we've done, I think, hopefully a good job, and I hope that you'll see it reflected in the projects we've approved, in order to try to encourage a variety of different housing types for different people, led by different people than traditionally haven't led in development. And so we're thankful for the CMHC and the money we've got in order to try to be able to take a lead in that. As a city, we haven't had that opportunity. Typically, that's been the role of the feds or the province for many years in housing. We haven't played a prominent role like that. We haven't had $25 million to spend on housing. And so this is new for us, and it's been very exciting to support great projects. But it's, so some of that on the incentive side, but the regulatory side of things, I think you'll see some change, positive change.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to be said for the approach that has been taken historically, which has been a very top-down kind of colonial approach. And I think if we are to decolonize our city, decolonize our public places, a lot of it has to come from a more bottom-up place so that we can involve as many people in the process as possible. And so that really comes down to deconstructing the approach so that the barrier to entry for building housing becomes super easy for anybody at the community level to do it. So whether you're a person or a family or a nonprofit group, that the rules aren't this like huge complex maze that is essentially designed to keep people out, right? And so the more that we can allow people in the community to take hold of their own land, their own resources to bring themselves up, that's going to help in that regard. From a transportation perspective, is the same thing. We want to open it up to more options for more people so that they can freely meet their needs. And then on a public spaces perspective as well, I mean, there's been a little bit of a trend towards privatization of public spaces where we force developers to provide this green space or this park space in exchange for the city not doing it. Those are like semi-public places. They seem public, but they're not truly public, right? They're still privately owned, which comes with its own sets of problems for being truly accessible to everybody in the public, right? That all of a sudden you can be removed from there if you're causing a problem, or whatever it is that the owner of the property deems undesirable, right? There are different rules for government, right? Government, has to respect your rights to a certain extent that private property owners don't necessarily have to. So there's that sort of problematic shift to these semi-public spaces. So a return to more truly public spaces is also another way we need to be going forward.
Interesting on that, in the malls and corridors changes, they actually call those spaces civic spaces, which are, but the privatization of public space, I mean, that's what malls have become, is the privatization of public space. Mel, anything on that? Okay.
Just very quickly on that, because I agree obviously with what you both said. It's very interesting how we describe the Housing Accelerator Fund as putting like kind of the federal government putting their thumb on the scales and moving things around. There's always been thumbs on the scales. And we have the city that we have, and we have the resources where we have them for very specific reasons, because who has had the power in the city for a very long time? Where's the bike infrastructure? Where's the blue line? It's a lot easier to get around in certain parts of this town than others, and we know where those all are, and there's always been thumbs on the scales. So you can have certain people that are very upset about the federal government coming in and putting their thumb on the scale, but they're really balancing these scales. There's been far too many thumbs on one side of the scale for too long.
So Kathryn, we have the same thing in Calgary, which is basically the east of Deerfoot. Forest Lawn and sort of communities that have been neglected for a long time. In talking about this, and one of the challenges has been, it's been the more affluent communities that have gotten the RCGs, that have gotten the redevelopment and the funds that go with it. Has there been any discussion or any kind of work around how do we make sure that we're not leaving communities behind as we move forward with something like the Housing Accelerator Fund changes?
I'll do my best to answer this question. There are probably people in Calgary who are better equipped to answer this than I am. But I will say that one of the really important things about Calgary's rezoning for housing program is that it was citywide. And so there was a lot of talk about how, this should only go in neighborhoods where it makes sense, which is often code for neighborhoods that are not mine. But I really think it was important that it was citywide, it was everywhere in the city, and I think that puts every neighborhood on a bit of an equal footing. And you're absolutely right that the east of Deerfoot is, I mean, it's almost a different, it's a very different city than the west of Deerfoot, Calgary. We hear in our public hearing process, we rarely hear from people east of Deerfoot, and the development patterns are very different. So I think by making zoning citywide, by making it uniform, it gives every neighborhood an opportunity to participate in this process.
Okay, great. Well, thanks very much. Caleb, you've got a question from online?
Yeah, we do. So
do you need a microphone to ask it?
Nope, I'm good. Stream can hear me, and you can hear me, and Kathryn can hear me, which is all we're good with. Okay, so question coming in is how, for whoever wants to take it, how do we propose to balance the amount of infill in an area? The element I'm not understanding is multiplying the impact of each potential change on a block, adding 1 out of 20 to multifamily, then 2 out of 20, then 5 out of 20. Are we building any caps?
I'm looking
So-
at you, Richard.
Kathryn has hand up as well.
Go, Kathryn.
Sorry, I can speak to that really quickly. And I will just say that development moves really slowly. And so I mentioned that it's been legal in my neighborhood for about 10 years, but change only happens when a landowner makes that change happen. So I live on a street of 1957 bungalows. On my block, there has only been one infill built, and it's actually a duplex. It's not even a fourplex. And so I think that people are legitimately concerned about the potential for the pace of change and for too much change. But I think realistically, that's not something we've seen in Calgary. And I, especially going back to my previous point about how making it citywide is really important. If you spread the potential around, no neighborhood is disproportionately impacted by change. Every neighborhood has a chance to participate. So anecdotally, from my own experience, change moves so slowly, buildings are built slowly enough that I would encourage people to not worry too much about it moving too fast or happening too much.
Well, to a great extent, yeah. I mean, that's the experience. I mean, I see Peter here. I've been involved in helping to shape change around zoning rules in Winnipeg for a while. One of the biggest fears that people have is, and I think that fear will manifest, it sounds like it manifested in Calgary, and I think it'll manifest to some degree here in Winnipeg, is when we talk about changes to land use or zoning, people will go, oh my God, everything is changing overnight. And that's just not the case. It takes a long time for communities to evolve and change. And when you build a new house, and all of a sudden you have the rights to do 4 units on that property, you're not going to tear down that house and put 4 units. It's just not going to happen. You've invested into that house, it's a new build, it's not going to happen that way. So, yeah, it's a slow change and process, and I think that I will just like to say everything that you've experienced in Calgary, it's very similar for us here, and you're just a little bit more ahead of us than we are.
Yeah, I would just kind of reiterate what I had said earlier. If we make the rules so restrictive through setback requirements and height restrictions or lot sizes that it disqualifies a whole bunch of neighborhoods who have smaller lots, then yes, that will tend to direct more development into a handful of neighborhoods, right? But if we make our rules so that it truly is allowable in any neighborhood, that demand is going to be spread throughout the city. Not everybody wants to live in Glenwood. A lot of people want to live in St. James. Some people want to live in Elmwood. Some people want to live in St. Vital. Some people want to live in, there's a lot of places. And if that demand can truly be met through infill in those neighborhoods, then that's how it's going to be done. So that demand is going to be spread citywide as long as it actually is allowable citywide.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much. Question back here.
Okay, this is a tough question, and it's for any panelist that wants to answer. I'm with the William White Neighbourhood Association. So, in the North End, we have 4 units, 6-unit, houses. Most of them are burnt lately, so we have a huge problem. So we have a lot of empty lots. Now my question is, why isn't, like the North End is a huge area, excuse me, and we have a lot of empty lots, whether they're just got burnt properties on them or piles of rubble, or they've been cleared. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the city for clearing the ones that they have in our neighborhood. That's just been great. Now, why, with this accelerator fund, can't you offer the property owners that are sitting with the burnt house, that was a fourplex of some sort, or a multi-unit family, whether it housed 4 families or 6 families, why can't you offer them an incentive to tear this down, remove the rubble, and build a multi-family home in it? And just, I don't have statistics or anything, but I'm going to guess that we could easily build for 200 families in the North End on these lots that are much larger than 33 width, which meets the requirements. The height restrictions, we already have infill housing. Some of them are the 3-family ups. Nobody's complained. Everybody's, yeah, just let it go. Nobody seems to care too much in the North End. And if you drive the streets, you'll see these infill houses that have been built, whether they're row houses or they're multifamily with the garages. They're all going up, but for some reason, we're sitting with hundreds, not just 20 or 30 lots in that area that could be used, and probably there'd be no opposition, and it's just a matter of why can't the accelerated fund have incentive either for the property owners or developers to go in there, buy these properties, and start building these homes, and we could solve 200 families' problems right away.
That's actually a really good point. That's actually a really good point. So, barrier to entry is how do we get it so that we actually have the supports or incentives for that individual property owner to take advantage of this, because we do have a lot of opportunity existing there, rather than just, hey, where are we going to put in the 50 units or the 25 units or the 150 units?
That's a very good question. The issue, one of the areas that I'm responsible for as well is the Land Enhancement Office, which is one of our initiatives in the Housing Accelerator Fund, which is looking at City of Winnipeg owned land and how can we get more housing on it. Some of these lands we've acquired through tax sale, and they're located in areas like William White. We are very much trying to figure out how do we create our programs in order to have the best. A couple of factors. Social impact is a big thing for us when we're looking at our programs, and how do we do that? How do we drive programs that create huge social impact? But one of the key factors for us, and it's part of how the agreement with CMHC has been created, is that the Housing Accelerator Fund is for the creation of new units. So if we have a property that is let's say it's a 4-unit building or a 6-plex or whatever, and it's multifamily, and it's been damaged by fire or what have you, and if we were to fund its replacement, those units don't get counted towards our target. And our target matters. It's tied to our funding. We have to create, now in 2 years, overall 14,101 units. If we do not do that, then there's implications on our funding. And so that drive, and I know you mentioned earlier that it's 3,166 units, that's the over and above our base, but we have to hit the base. It's not use the money to get the 3,166. It's the money for 14,101 units by building permits by December 2026. And when I look at the interest rates high, inflation's been high, it's been down a little bit lately, but all those macroeconomic issues impact our base and the likelihood of us maybe or maybe not reaching our targets. And so, you know, there's a lot of different factors that have come to play in how we have crafted our programs and our initiatives, and how we're going to try to drive the numbers, because it's the targets, like as I say, they matter. We meet very frequently with our CMHC counterparts, and it's how close are we getting towards our milestones and our numbers. And so that matters a great deal to us. The social impact does as well. And so it's how can we get both and create those programs that are able to achieve both the numbers and the social impact. And the need is greater than the amount of money that we have. Like when we put out the call for the capital incentive grant in round one, we had over 66 applicants that applied. We had originally applied for 192 million from the federal government. We got 122. In that first round, if we would have given out all the money that we could to all those applicants, we would have exceeded the 192 that we had asked for originally. The development community, the nonprofit community in Winnipeg stepped up with projects in a way that we didn't think they would. And it was it's great, but then you feel that you can't meet the need. That's great. And so it's both a positive and it's a sad negative for us not to be able to do all these projects. And that's just on the capital incentive grant and what we've received in terms of applications, let alone, I'm sorry I don't know your name, but your neighborhood and the issues that you're facing in your neighborhood that we also want to try to address as well. And so it's a long-winded way of saying we have our eye on it as well. So sometimes how programs get created, it forces us into prioritizing certain type of projects over another, unfortunately. And we're looking to see, as I said, try to drive the number of units in order to meet our contractual obligations with the federal government, but also try to drive that social impact, and it's a hard balance to strike sometimes.
So I would like to address that. The fact that you have in your neighborhood burnt out husks of properties and a need for housing, a need for more building, and it's not getting done, is a failure of the system we have put in place. And it is part of that system, part and parcel. The development pattern we have adopted is one of building a whole neighborhood all at once, and then freezing it in amber and letting it decline, and then building a new one on the outside and letting that decline, and building another one on the outside. What that does to land values, it is not creating new value. What it is doing is it is taking value that existed in the inner city and it is moving it to the edge, and then moving it to the edge, and that hollows out that donut, right? And so you're suffering from that development pattern. And for a developer to want to develop something, it needs to be profitable. And for that to happen, they need certain land values to have a certain development intensity. It's why nobody goes out and builds a 60-story apartment building in the middle of a farm field, right? The land value is too low to support that much intensity. The only way you would do that is through government subsidy, right? That doesn't happen. And unfortunately, land value has been stolen from your neighborhood to be repurposed to the outside, right? And so now you have too low a land value to support the amount of housing intensity that the neighborhood needs, the community needs it. And coupled with the fact that maybe a fourplex or a sixplex was there before, but it was grandfathered in on a single family lot, right? It was built before zoning. And so now that it's disappeared, it can no longer be a sixplex. And in order for a developer to recoup their costs, it might need to be a sixplex, but the zoning doesn't allow it, and the costs to rezone that are too big to recoup in a neighborhood with lower incomes, for example. And so how do you fix it? You could do it one way by subsidizing it. The other way you can do it is to, again, bring down that barrier to entry. Make it so that a sixplex or a fiveplex or a fourplex, whatever it is just allowed. bring back the bring down those barrier to entry so that the community can invest in itself, right? So that, because we've gotten to a place where basically we talk about developers as this other thing that they do something to our neighborhoods, right? It's for the good or for the bad, but the developers are the ones that are building our city. But we're too reliant on developers because there's a lot of development that needs to happen by people in their own neighborhood, people meeting their own needs, you know, building a granny suite for their mother-in-law to move in, or you know, building a cottage housing for their college student nephew who wants to, you know, just as your needs evolve, you need to be able to evolve your needs, your own housing, right? Maybe somebody decides, oh, well, you know, I want to downsize, but I also want some extra revenue in retirement. I'm going to sell my house and I'm going to build a triplex on the lot beside. You know, there's a million different things. We can't predict everybody's needs, and so we need to make it easy for that level of investment to happen, whether it's, again, individual neighbors or local nonprofits or community groups, to be able to meet their own needs in their neighborhood. But it has to be easy, it has to be possible. And that way we don't have to rely on a developer having to turn a profit, right? We don't have to worry about that. We can just meet our own needs in our own neighborhood, and deal with the lots themselves. Because a person who owns a lot that has a burnt pile of rubble on it is not making them any money. If they're not developing it, it's because that won't make them any more money either, right? And we can't rely on that to make our neighborhoods a better place. We have to be able to, we have to be allowed and able to do it. And currently the system doesn't allow that to be easy. Like, our rezoning is tens of thousands of dollars and you're not guaranteed to have it. Nobody can take that kind of risk as an individual, you know, unless you have very deep pockets. And so that essentially forbids, you know, a lot of people from participating in bettering their own neighborhood.
Want to jump in?
I will just add that we're here today to talk about the Housing Accelerator Fund, but that is just one tool. And it's just very clear that we have a way bigger need than one fund or one program can manage, and we need to do more. We need to be walking and chewing gum at the same time.
And I think Michel has pointed out that the Housing Accelerator Fund will open up opportunity, because it may have had 4 on there before, but it might only be currently zoned for 1. And so, as Michel pointed out, the barriers to actually doing something with it. I live in West Broadway, and as I walk around West Broadway and look at the apartment buildings and all of those, they're all illegal today. They've been there for 80, 90, 100 years, and if that apartment building burns down, you cannot rebuild it. The zoning doesn't allow it anymore. So we have a lot of buildings, a lot of properties in Winnipeg, actually in every city, that the zoning has changed since they were built so that they are no longer legal. And as I say, I live in West Broadway, and the apartment buildings that are all in my neighborhood, most of them would not be allowed to be built today.
Okay, I've been doing this housing thing and volunteering in the North End for 35 years now. And so I've worked a lot of hours with the City of Winnipeg on making changes. 10 years ago, we met at the Millennium Library. It was a 2-day seminar on what we wanted to see our neighborhoods look like. All those areas, the very interesting thing was the same thing you're talking about. These big monstrosities plugged in the neighborhood, what do you call it? Because on a 30-foot lot, you'd obviously have to go up, okay? That's the only way you're gonna have a building that could house 4 families or whatever. You have to go up. The interesting thing about it was every neighborhood in the City of Winnipeg was represented at that meeting. All of us agreed that these monstrosities that you guys are talking about, 3-4 family monstrosities, can be allowed, but like for instance, over in the Grant area and the Corden area, they wanted to keep those kind of places along Stafford Avenue, along main thoroughfares. The big ones were going to be allowed on the big thoroughfares. They didn't want them in the middle of the block. And I agree with that, because the one thing everybody agreed on is Winnipeg neighborhoods each had their own characters. And if you talk about certain pockets of them, they're identified like Norwood Flats and all that kind of stuff. Those people like the fact that they don't have streets running between their houses, they have sidewalks. So my question is what do you call it? 10 years ago, we said no to plugging these monstrosities into the middle of the block. And I think that if you do your homework and you do your consultation, you'll find the community today is still not ready for these monstrosities to be in the middle of the block. Put them on the Selkirk Avenues, the McGregors, the Salters, the main streets, but don't go ahead and drop it in the middle of my block, because I'll oppose you every day of the week.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. I think that we're going to have a really good conversation about all of this and what it actually means. And we can look at the experience of other cities as well, because the issues that you're raising are issues that we've been hearing.
For your person in Calgary, I lived in Calgary in 1977. Calgary is nothing like it was in 1977.
You're right. They've had the Olympics.
Yeah, but it's so much bigger.
Yeah, you raise a lot of really good points. I completely agree that each neighborhood has its own personality, its own flavor, and it should be that way. I also agree that, after 80 years or 70 years of having zoning rules that have locked everything in place, that changing things is maybe not scary, but it is overwhelming to have any kind of change, and especially when we're talking about fourplexes or 4 stories or anything like that, it is a lot of change to take. But I would argue that the Arlington Bridge closing is also a change. The Happy Land Pool closing is also a change. Potholed roads that we just can't get fixed is also a change. People not having a place to live and living in bus shacks is also a change. All of these things are changes, and we can choose. I don't think we can opt out of change, but we can choose the type of change that we would rather have. And would we rather have the types of change that maybe have larger buildings in our neighborhoods, that maybe cast some shadows, that maybe are closer to our windows than we like, but that provide more fiscal capacity for the city to maintain the stuff it has, to add more services, to add more recreation, to maintain our tree canopy, to keep sewage out of the rivers. I would say that is a conversation we need to have, and of course, like I said, the details matter. And so just because we allow certain things in our neighborhoods doesn't mean they can look in any old way, right? We should have a discussion about how this comes in. But yeah, we can't opt out of change. Change is happening anyways. And right now, I would say the change that we're experiencing is not good for anybody.
Thank you very much. We're going to have one last question from online, and then I am very cognizant of the time. I'm holding you all here longer than had been predicted.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a lot of passionate speakers and passionate people here, so it's great that we have a lot. I'm sorry for everyone in the chat. We're probably not going to get to a ton of your questions, so one more that we'll quickly touch on. What do people foresee the impact of Pierre Poilievre pledging to cancel the Housing Accelerator Fund should the Conservatives win the next federal election being worried that this will be used to block enacting the changes?
Well, you won't have to build 14,000 units.
I thought I made it very clear that I am not a clairvoyant.
Anybody care to have a prediction on that? I mean, being the ex-politician I'm like, wow. That is unfortunately one of the challenges that we have with government, is that governments can change and governments can change policy and they can change how things happen. And I think from a municipality's perspective, the rush has got to be on to get as much into the pipeline as you can before that potentially happens. So, Richard, your deadline of December 2026 might actually be October 2025. Go!
Yeah, we can't predict the future, that's for sure. For us, though, we are working towards, honoring the spirit of the agreement. There's a lot of good things that we're doing with this money. And we're excited to do more of it. More changes coming if we can get the other rounds of dollars from the feds, because we get it every year. That's in 4 installments. And so it's subject to yearly appropriations through the budgetary process. Obviously, we like to see all $120 million come to Winnipeg so that we can get more housing built and have systemic change that I think we've been talking about tonight. So it would be sad to see not all 4 installments come our way, and the potential change that we would see. I just look at the list of projects that we've been looking at on our capital incentive grant. I'd like to fund all of them if we could. There's really great projects, and so we obviously would not want to see the program get canceled. It would have a negative impact on us all.
You want to speculate on that? Go.
I'm also not a clairvoyant. I will just say that governments represent us, and so I think it's really important that this money has touched so many communities across Canada, and big, small towns, large cities, and some of them are conservatively based and some of them aren't. So I think governments represent us, and the more that we can talk about this, the better. And to address your comment, because I think that's what a lot of people are feeling, and that's what we can see in cities that have experienced a lot of growth without having these zoning changes to kind of support that growth, and we call that tall and sprawl. So you kind of have, single family, giant monstrosity, as you describe it. And so if we can loosen the zoning, that's about like spreading it out around so that we aren't in that tall and sprawl situation.
Thank you. Kathryn, I think you live in a conservative city, Calgary. You're ahead of us. What are you guys going to do to make sure that you're demonstrating the amazing value of the Housing Accelerator Fund so that we make sure that we get it to completion? And your closing statement.
So unfortunately, I am also not a clairvoyant. On the politics, I will say, and this really surprised me, but Calgary had this, we had this inflection point in 2023 when we rejected our Housing Affordability Task Force, and Calgary said, no, we're not going to do anything about this. Out of nowhere, out of left field, it was actually members of the Conservative federal opposition who really came out swinging against Calgary's inaction. And I did not expect that. I did not expect to read statements by Conservative politicians that I agreed with so strongly. So I have no idea what will happen if there's a government change. But I do think that, and this could be just pure political opportunism, but I think that the Conservative government recognizes that our housing system is in crisis, and that whatever government is in power has to address that and has to be working toward finding solutions. And I don't know what those solutions will be. I'm trying to hold out hope that there will be a continuation of some of the work that has been done. And I think there's a good point made that our governments represent us and we do have a voice. And I think it's incumbent upon us all to be advocating for the continuation of policies that will help us with our housing issue. So Calgary is a conservative city, and sometimes conservative cities or conservative political entities can surprise us, and so I guess we'll have to see what the next little while holds. As far as my closing statement, I'm just delighted to have been on this panel in such illustrious company. I have high hopes for Winnipeg, and as I said, I hope your public hearing is shorter than ours, and I hope that all your Housing Accelerator Fund dreams come true.
Well, thank you. Thank you. We're going to leave it there. I want to thank Kathryn, Mel, Richard, and Michel for being part of this. Thank you, everybody online, for being here, and all of you as well, being in the room. What makes this successful is actually conversation. It's actually community engagement. And when I look at 740 people showing up for a public hearing to talk about land use, I think that's an awesome thing, because that says to me that we have a public, that we have people engaged in talking about what the future of their city looks like. So I personally do hope that we have a public hearing here, like they had in Calgary, because it is conversation that moves us forward. Thank you, everybody, for being here and being part of the conversation.
Thanks a lot, Brian, and our panelists. This has been a really great event. And yes, thanks everyone online for coming out. Everyone here, like Brian says, these conversations are really important. Do we want to see our pools keep closing, our traffic getting worse, and our unhoused community members continue to deal with what they're dealing with? So we have some tough decisions to make as a city, and I think we're heading in the right direction. I want to give a big shout out to our event planners tonight to make this whole thing possible. Give a round of applause for our YIMBY crew, please. Fanny and Olivia, thank you so much for coordinating and planning and running the communications for all this. You guys nailed it. It's been amazing. Caleb from Phase 5 Productions, running our AV gear here and producing the live stream. Amazing job. Alex isn't here tonight, but I just wanted to thank him for reaching out to our panelists and presenters and helping us in the background. Max for helping us with our policy and all the details that we have to deal with as an organization. And Chris and Jeffrey for helping us set up the event, running out, grabbing the coffee, and helping us with everything that we do. So big shout out to that. And then one last big, huge shout out to the man in the corner. I want to shout out to Dylan for setting up YIMBY and bringing us all together, because this man wants to see big change in our community, and we wouldn't be sitting here today if it wasn't for that man sitting over there today. So thanks everyone for coming out, and hope we have some more conversations in the future.